People's Radio United.
Thank you. One of the things that people don't realize, a lot of these initiatives, like all this, what I call kumbaya crap, is stuff that is coming out of the federal government. And in the aftermath of Ferguson, the federal government took a look around. They said, ooh, man, we better do something about this, because one of the things the federal government does not like, and one of the things I personally like right now, that's going on around the Trump stuff, is that they don't like it when we make the place ungovernable. They do not want us to ever make the place ungovernable. And when we do make things look like they're going to become ungovernable, that's when they actually take action. That's the only thing that ever works in the arena of forcing change. And so in Ferguson, and they see all these things blowing up, with all of these different cases, and in Minneapolis, and the Jamar Clark, and then, with the 18-day occupation of a police station. I mean, really, these are big things to these people. So they're freaking out, something bad going on around the country. So they call this thing called the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And then this was under Obama about 3 years ago now. Couple years, whatever, Ferguson, couple years. I'm a terrible historian. But anyway, so they call this thing together, and basically the first thing they say, first of all, they bring all these people together. The guy that was the chair of it was Charles Ramsey, who's a super brutal police chief, endorses police brutality. So why would you put this guy in charge of a task force on 21st century policing that's supposed to be addressing all of these problems with police? Why would you do this? Well, okay, because that tells you the intent of the thing right out of the gate. Then they put a bunch of people on this task force who have zero history of doing any substantive work around police accountability in this country. They didn't ask, like activists like me or Michael Quinn, or Michael Quinn, who's the guy, the retired police officer who wrote the book Walking with the Devil. That's a guy that you should have got on that task force. Even if you don't like, stinky old nasty activists like me or whatever, you should be getting guys like that. It's people with some actual expertise on this stuff, right? People all over the country. I could give you a list of 24 of them that would have been good candidates for this thing. Not a one of them landed on this list, okay? They had all these, university professor type people and academics that didn't have any background doing this work, actually doing it, and so they bring this task force together. The first thing they say is militarization of police is off the table. You cannot discuss this. That is not an issue, even though that was one of the primary issues in Ferguson. They said militarization of police is not going to be discussed by this task force. They were supposed to go city to city and gather information. They went to D.C. and I think Cincinnati, Ohio, or Cleveland, Ohio. They went to two places and gathered, I don't know what information in what format and how they did it, but there's no appreciable information about that. They get no information from anybody. They don't go to any other places where there's problems, actual problems. And one of the places that they didn't even go to was Ferguson. So then they do this task force. They come out with this little list of recommendations. Maybe one or two of them are slightly valid. The rest are nonsense. And then the one big recommendation was, wait for it, body cameras. So right. Now where all this money's coming from. Why Minneapolis got $1 million or whatever, $500,000 or whatever for body cameras that we could buy. St. Paul just got $500,000 for their body cameras, because they know this is what all these agencies, these kinds of things do, these task forces and projects and whatever else they call them. These things always are about coming up with a solution that doesn't actually solve the problem, that does not in any way actually challenge the status quo. Because the problem is not, and they come up with all this crap about police community relations and woo and all that, because the problem isn't about police community relations. The problem is about a lack of accountability. That's it. If you had accountability, you wouldn't have a problem with police community relationships or trust and all this other crap. Also things that came out of this, that's it. Also things that came out of this idiot task force was this little new thing that they're going around doing, National Institute for Trust and Justice. What they're doing is they're coming up with these lists. They meet with the police chief and they do all these things, and they put people on the local task force. It's like a local version of this national thing. They put people on there who have no accountability to the community, who are not considered leaders in this movement in any way whatsoever, are not, they put people in, they might be like an African-American person, but they're not a person who people trust in that community as an actual legitimate leader. They pick these phony leaders that usually are on the payroll of the city anyway. And they put these people on these committees. They meet in secret. They're not accountable to anybody. And then they come out with all of this kumbaya crap. And one of them here, for example, was, the Minneapolis police will value the sanctity of life, yeah, my foot. That should be a decision making. The number one principle on whether to use force is the sanctity of life. Let me tell you, it didn't stop him from swinging one billy club, tasing one person multiple times, or any other thing. It means it's like this kind of aspirational goal, maybe,
right?
But not an actual policy, and not an actual thing that you could discipline somebody for violating. So, having if you and I said, oh, we'd like to be rich someday, or whatever. That's a silly goal because you make no plans to get there, and there's no consequences for not getting there, So again,
right.
These are the kinds of sort of things, and they look very good on paper, and they make a nice media report, in the media. But the reality is they're useless, and they don't benefit the community in any meaningful way. So it doesn't change things. It's what we see out there. But a lot of this stuff you're seeing, like, great example. St. Anthony Police Department. That's the police department that killed Philando Castile. They decided to go with a program with the DOJ, a voluntary program where the DOJ comes in and they work with the police department to reform their practices and to adopt best practices and stuff like that, which actually sounds very good. Best practices is a good concept. You should see what works well and what has proven itself to work well through studies and so forth, and adopt those things. In nursing and in healthcare, we do this all the time. We look at, does this kind of bandage work better than that kind of bandage? And then if that kind of bandage has less infections, and we can study it, and we know over multiple studies that it's got less infections, and that's a proven thing, then we're going to go with this other kind of bandage that has less infections. This is how we do things in healthcare. This is a good thing. So best practices is wonderful. But the reality is it's voluntary. The police chief can say, get the hell out of Dodge anytime he wants to. This is already a police chief that's gone to great lengths to defend the cop that killed Philando Castile. Do we think he's going to voluntarily change his police department? Come on now. What needs to happen in those situations where cops are acting in an egregious manner, like this police department that literally made 40, what was it now? I figured it out. I think it was 44% of the revenue of that city was coming from tickets that they were giving to folks driving through that city, so fines and tickets and so forth. And so this is really something, this is a city that's violating people's civil rights wholesale. Do we honestly think they're going to give up doing that just because they're involved in some stupid voluntary effort? No, these are a cops department that needs to be put in receivership, and they need to be forced by the courts to clean their act up. That's what works, not this phony kumbaya, let's all hold hands and get along better and stuff like that. And I just want to throw one more thing. We have a flyer on our website. People can find it if they go to CUAPB.org and then go to the publications area. Under our reports thing on there, the tab, they can find a report where we talk about, the kinds of false framing that this whole thing is when you talk about police community relations and trust and all this. We have to talk about a phony framing that is, because when you talk about police community relations, you're really saying that the community owns 50% of the responsibility for the problem. And we don't, because we're not the ones bringing guns into the neighborhood and tanks and dressing like Ninja Turtle, in flak suits and bringing military weaponry. What's that? Yeah, that's what I call it. But what I mean? We're not the ones coming in, like SWAT gear, to people's neighborhoods. We're not doing that stuff. We aren't the ones killing them. Yes, there have been some incidents, but those are typically extremists, and oftentimes white extremists, I might add, white supremacist extremists. But anyway, we're not the ones, doing this stuff largely. They are the ones killing us, and the numbers prove it. So these kinds of initiatives, people just have to get real about this stuff. And one of our little specialties is when they show up at places like St. Anthony for community hearing, we put out all the hard questions. We show up with flyers. We educate people about what these programs are about and what they're not going to be able to do and why they're not going to be able to. And we teach the community how to address these things. And largely, one of the ways to address them is just frankly ignore them. They aren't going to do any good. They aren't going to make anything. And the other thing to do is to go to the city council or go to your police department, whatever it is, and demand that they do something real. Or you demand the federal government get in here and do a receivership or something that actually matters, not foolishness where we all come together voluntarily and if we just trusted each other more and blah, blah, blah. That's all crap. If the cops behaved correctly, there would be no problems with community relations and there would be no problems with trust. It is about acting correctly and having accountability such that there are consequences when the cops don't. Period. End of story. So, right. That's and we put this out every single time, and people love it when we do this because we change the entire tenor of the little event. They thought they were going to come and have a little lovely kind of kumbaya deal and have a nice little fun thing where they do their PR campaign on the community, and we flip the script on them, and man, has that been effective. I would really urge people to get boned up on this stuff. It doesn't take any amount of work because all their stuff's on the internet. They like to do good PR campaigns on the internet too. So it's very easy to see how phony their stuff is. And just a small amount of analysis and you've got a good flyer that can educate your community on how ridiculous these things are and and to tell them that they are not a substitute for accountability.